Imagine you are alone on a rain-slick highway at 2:17 a.m. The heater clicks off, and two small faces appear at your car window, pale and patient. They ask, in a voice too precise for children, if you can drive them home. Their eyes are wrong. Not irises, but pools of midnight that swallow the light. Those minutes become the opening paragraph of an internet legend that refuses to let you sleep. In the mid-1990s, the idea of a child at your window who is not a child, but a dark absence of eyes, would have stayed on porches and in pub corners. Then, a short first-person posting changed that. In 1996, a reporter named Brian Bethel, working in Abilene, Texas, published an account of pulling into a grocery store late at night and feeling two shapes press against his driver's side window. He described a chill, how his headlights revealed nothing but black beneath their brows, and the children, gentle and urgent, asking to be let in. It was vivid and local and easy to dismiss as fiction, yet it contained a template for later retellings. Over the next decade, that same template reappeared in new places. Kids on a suburban doorstep in Cheshire, a teenager at a gas station in Colorado, a single mother renting a house outside Sydney whose dogs would not stop howling. Folklorists recognized the motif immediately because it echoed changeling tales from Ireland and Iceland, where neighbors warned one another about fairy swaps. It also tapped into modern anxieties, stranger danger, and the fear of something that looks like innocence but feels wrong. The internet did something different. Forums, chat rooms, and later creepypasta sites turned private scares into public scripts. With a handful of sensory details, the tiny knocking, the polite voice, the black voids where whites should be, anyone could reuse the scene and make it feel true. By the early 2000s, the black-eyed children had left Abilene and become perennial late-night guests online. They were reshaped into a shared modern myth retold in comment threads and message boards across the web. After Bethel's initial post, the tale spread, fed by the hunger of rumor. On late-night message boards throughout 1997 and into the 2000s, people began posting their own encounters. I started to notice the same stage directions. Cars pulling into empty parking lots, cheap sodium lights humming, rain on the windshield, a polite knock on the driver's side window. In one early excerpt, a poster claimed she was a clerk at a 24-hour Texaco in Amarillo in March 2001, who remembered a little boy at the pump asking to borrow a lighter and meeting the emptiness of those eyes. Another thread from 2006 that circulated on forums described a mother on a cul-de-sac in Sheffield, England, who woke to soft thumping on the back door and a pair of small faces pressed to the frost-swept glass. The voices were always conversational, unnervingly adult in phrasing, and the children spoke with a desperate civility, lines like, "Please, can you let me in? Please, I need to use the phone." In many accounts, the dogs refused to approach. Car radios filled with static, and the air felt colder than it should at the edge of a street lamp. Over time, these motifs hardened into a checklist readers used to judge credibility. The first major development was that stories did not remain isolated. They began to conform. A reader in Portland could feel the same fear a poster in rural Galway felt decades earlier. The effect was twofold. For believers, each new report felt like confirmation. For skeptics, the duplication suggested a cultural template rather than proof. As forums evolved into social platforms, the encounters shifted again. In the late 2000s, videos started to appear on YouTube claiming to show black-eyed children at porches and windows. The footage was grainy and the camera angles poor, but the comment threads below were fierce, brimming with people insisting they'd experienced the same cold, the same lack of eyes. Local police departments logged calls from frightened residents, and in some towns, officers filed reports even when no physical evidence was found. Amateur investigators chased leads and turned up nothing concrete, only more stories. The pattern kept spreading, shared sensory anchors, recurring lines, and an expanding archive of eyewitness accounts, but no clear, verifiable proof. By the mid-2000s, the phenomenon had slipped from anecdote into analysis. I remember sitting in a dim study in 2011, eyes burning from computer light, scrolling through dozens of threads and realizing the internet had given these old motifs shape and speed. Folklorists like Jan Harold Brunvand have long shown how urban legends replicate a compact set of cues, and the black-eyed children fit that model perfectly. They follow a consistent behavioral script, a late-night approach, a polite request that escalates to insistence, and the familiar sensory details we expect: the dogs, the static on radios, the sudden cold. Psychologists offered proximate explanations too. Some pointed out that extreme pupil dilation in low light, or the use of full scleral contact lenses, can make eyes look uniformly dark. Others highlighted sleep-related phenomena and dissociation sometimes described in encounter reports. Social psychologists emphasized suggestion and contagion. The more the story circulated, the more people reinterpreted ambiguous real experiences to fit the script. Then there were the incentives. From about 2008 onward, YouTube began to monetize attention, and sites devoted to the paranormal cultivated followings. A well-produced, caught-on-camera clip could bring thousands of views and patrons. That economic reality encouraged staged videos and elaborate hoaxes, and made it harder to separate a frightened witness from a content creator testing a concept. Investigators and skeptics cataloged predictable red flags, reused lighting, improbable camera framing, circularities in testimony. At the same time, literary and folkloric parallels deepened the mystery. Changelings in Irish and Norse lore were not just swaps of children, but social explanations for illness or difference. The black-eyed children recapitulate that fear of the familiar turning alien, with a modern moral: don't invite the wrong guest inside. Television shows and podcasts amplified the lore, inviting witnesses to call in and sometimes rewarding the most vivid narratives with airtime. Those broadcasts then fed back into forums and even local police logs. Skeptics documented dozens of cases where further inquiry found no corroborating evidence, or where alleged witnesses later admitted to exaggeration. Taken together, the folkloric templates, psychological tendencies, and economic incentives created a perfect storm for a modern legend to spread. By the time the phenomenon reached its peak, the internet felt like a pressure cooker of raw testimony and staged media. Late nights on message boards were punctuated by frantic posts. In one 2009 account, an anonymous hospital worker said 2 children asked to come in to use the payphone, and they used words that made her blood run cold. Those claims were met with both earnest belief and forensic skepticism. Skeptical journalists began to take the evidence apart, frame by frame. Many so-called security camera clips were revealed to be badly edited or filmed with lenses that hide the whites of the eyes. Some were shot with actors or later admitted to be pranks. But the human stories were the hardest to dismantle. There are repeated scenes that keep coming back. A driver in the rain, headlights fogging, a pair of shoes at the curb, a child's hand smearing condensation on the window, the whispered pleas cutting through the roar of a heater, and that primal decision to open the door or not. When you sit with people who tell those stories, you feel the memory in their bodies. They flinch at sudden knocks for months. They stop letting unknown children into cars. The patterns reveal something more structural too. Encounters cluster at thresholds and liminal spaces, doorways, windshields, gas pumps, places that stand between public and private. Changelings and other folklore figures also appear at thresholds, as bridges to another world. The recurring motif of polite insistence becomes a warning about hospitality and vulnerability that stretches across centuries. And at its worst, black-eyed children narratives have real-world consequences. Communities reported spikes in calls to police, homeowners added extra locks, and neighborhoods watched each other's houses through long nights. Hoaxes inspired copycat behavior, teenagers testing limits, online creators staging encounters to harvest attention. Some witnesses sought counseling for chronic anxiety and sleep disturbance, describing a persistent sense of being watched. Parents shuffled routines and schools issued warnings about prank behavior. In small towns, those rumor threads tugged at older fears about strangers and hospitality, and suddenly, those fears felt urgent. What started online as spooky stories and shaky clips bled into everyday life, changing how people moved through their neighborhoods and how they looked out for one another. That is the real power of this phenomenon. Whether true or not, the stories reshaped behavior and sowed a new kind of caution into communities. I reached a pivotal moment of understanding in a cold library reading room. A folktales scholar spread out printouts dating from 1996 to the present and pointed to the same structural markers: the venues, the liminal spaces, a polite request, and sensory anchors. He said calmly that the data pointed away from a single supernatural perpetrator and toward a social pattern. The discovery felt anticlimactic and terrifying at the same time. Anticlimactic because there was no smoking gun photograph or medical test. Terrifying because the pattern could account for everything the stories were designed to explain. If you accept that the legend works like a mimetic script, a repeatable pattern people copy, then every ambiguous encounter, every late-night knock at a window becomes potential fuel. The consequences followed quickly. Local news segments that once amplified the scariest accounts fed new online interest. Money and attention rewarded dramatic twists. Pranksters imitated the script. Community responses hardened neighbors into watchers. Police records showed spikes in calls after viral episodes, and some families reported weeks of hypervigilance and disrupted sleep. There was, however, a decisive answer to one question. Despite hundreds of testimonies, no verifiable evidence of truly black, anatomical eyes stood up to independent scrutiny. Close analysis turned up ordinary explanations: poor lighting, cosmetic contact lenses, digital editing, or testimony shaped to fit the pattern. That finding did not dissolve the fear. Instead, it reframed the legend as a cautionary mirror, a modern changeling tale about the risks of openness at night and the rumors we keep alive together. The black-eyed children phenomenon didn't rewrite the laws of nature, but it did change how fear is produced and consumed. For media industries, it became raw material. TV shows, podcasts, and indie filmmakers repurposed the image of polite children with empty eyes as a shorthand for something uncanny and threatening. For platforms, it became a case study in how attention economies reward the most shocking narratives and incentivize staging and sensationalism. For ordinary people, it changed routines in more concrete ways. Some neighborhoods installed extra lighting and cameras. Parents tightened rules about unknown passengers, and police departments logged spikes in late-night calls after viral posts. Academically, the story is now taught as a modern folk tale, a clear example of mimetic transmission where an old motif recombines with new technologies. Psychologists and sociologists point out how confirmation bias, group reinforcement, and the mechanics of social media can turn a private unease into collective panic. That is the haunting bottom line. The black-eyed children are less an unsolved cryptid than a mirror. They reveal the shape of our anxieties, the fragility of our thresholds, and the strange power of stories to turn a single night and a shiver into a global script. The next time you hear a polite knock late at night, you'll already know the lines because so many others taught them to you.